Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Welcome everybody to our session 13, where we're going to cover this week the chapter of Yaqub or Yaqub, Jacob. I have to admit that this particular chapter is one of my least favorite chapters of the Fusus al-Hikam, and for a number of reasons that I will soon cover. Number one, I think Ibn Arabi confuses the trajectory of the divine fil or the divine action in between al-mashia and irada, which he's covering. And because in my metaphysics and in the Imami texts, al-amr, the divine command, is equivalent to the mashia, to the divine will. The translators, and just generally in a lot of English language translations that we have, there seems to be a very an imprecision in translating these terminology correctly. I have always basically resolved to translate the word mashia as will and irada as volition. And if you have been paying attention so far as what we've been reading, the divine mashia or the divine will is the universal element of the divine, effusion or emanation, which generates every conceivable possibility in its infinities. And the divine volition or irada is what circumscribes these possibilities and actualizes them into reality. So at the latter half of this chapter, there seems to be a bit of an equivocation on the verge of outright confusion on the part of Ibn Arabi. It's one of the things I mentioned in the podcast with Salman that I very sharply disagree with Ibn Arabi about. This is one of them in this text. And it's also the same to some degree in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah. So what I've done is I've taken two hadith from Khulaini's Usul min al-Kafi from the Kitab al-Tawheed, the book of the Unicity, the third or second book of the Usul min al-Kafi, the standard Shiite hadith collection, where two particular hadith, there's more of them, but these two particular serve as a very important proof text for the delineation of an imami theology or metaphysics of the divine will. And the first one, attributed to the sixth Imam, is where he says, خلق الله المشيئة بنفسها ثم خلق الأشياء بالمشيئة. God created the will by itself, then created all things or the entified things through the will, right? And in the parlance, in the diction of Imami Akbarians, Imami esotericists, whether we're talking about some of the earlier generations, such as Rajab Bursi or even Sayyid Haydar al-Muli, they understand these very fine distinctions that we have in the Imami Hadith connection. And even they have a problem with the way that Ibn Arabi deals with this particular chapter. So it's very precise. And with all of them, al-Mashia and al-Amr, the command, are equivalent. So when we say al-Mashia, we're saying the Amr. Here, at the latter part of the chapter of Jacob, Ibn Arabi seems to be all over the place to some degree, and it seems to be a little bit confused, which I don't understand why. And between his commentators, and I mean especially the first couple of generations who set the standard for all the commentaries to come afterwards, they don't resolve the issue in any satisfactory fashion either. And surprisingly, including Abdul Razak Kashani, who himself was a Shiite or came from a Shiite family. The second hadith in this collection of Khulaini, which is also from the Kitab al-Tawheed, says, and this is also from Abu Abdullah Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, لا يكون شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء إلا بهذه خصال السبع بمشيئة وإرادة وقدر وقضاء وإمضاء, or some manuscripts have إذن وأجل وكتاب. Translation: nothing comes to be of anything in the earth or in the heavens except by these seven creative attributive imprints: the will, volition, determination, authorization, realization, or some manuscripts have permission, the appointed time, and the book, which also means decree. So this is the proof text, as is, or for the theology or the metaphysics of the divine action, the al-fil al-ilahiyya. And lots of different ink has been spilled on this issue by the Imamis. One of the better treatises that I've found is from one of the near contemporaries of Mullah Sadra, the sage Qadi Sa'id al-Qummi. He has a very short treatise on this where he delineates all this, and he also then refers very briefly to Ibn Arabi as well. The treatise does not exist in an English translation. It's short enough to warrant a translation and a short commentary in its own right. I'll find it for those who read Arabic. I'll upload it to the Telegram page and they can take a look at it if they have the time. I think this deserves a translation. So keep these issues in mind. And then once we get to the discussion, we can talk about it. The other issue I have a problem with is that Ibn Arabi is trying to define the word Islam, even with the definite article, as a noun. And if one goes through the text of the Quran, even when Islam appears with an alif lam, it's arguable whether you can make that justification to define al-Islam as being a noun rather than as a verb functioning in the position of a noun. This is a question that comes up with me again and again. And he does again in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, and it's one of the disagreements I have with Ibn Arabi completely over this. In any case, let's get cracking into this chapter, the wisdom of spirit in the word of Jacob. And I also mentioned this before I start. Contrary to all the previous commentators, Daud Qaisari disagrees with his own teacher, Abdul Razak al-Kashani, and also his teacher before him, Mu'in-Din Jandi, and also Sadruddin Qunawi, Ibn Arabi's successor, that the attribute or the wisdom here is spirit. He says that it is not ruh, but roh, which means ease. And he justifies this on the basis of the verse that is later on cited by Ibn Arabi, where ruh and roh are occurring simultaneously. So the spirit and ease are working together. That is a very interesting point of departure, but before him, the consensus with Qunawi, with Jandi, and with Abdul Razak al-Kashani was all that this is ruh rather than roh. So Qaisari is the one that introduces this conundrum. You can read it that way, and in some sense, when you read the rest of the chapter, it kind of becomes that way, that maybe even Arabi was not instancing ruh as spirit, but roh as in ease, where Jacob is concerned. So this is another thing to keep in mind. Anyway, let's start. The wisdom of spirit in the word of Jacob. Religion is of two kinds: the religion of God, and those whom God has taught his religion, and those whom they have taught. And second, the religion of created beings, which God acknowledges. The religion of God is that chosen by him and set by him at a level far above the religion of creation. He says, Abraham enjoined it upon his sons, as this Jacob, his son, saying, O my son, God has chosen for you the religion, so die not save as submitting yourselves to him, which means following him. Religion in this verse has the definite article, that here it is. Namely, it is a known and established religion. He says, the religion is with God, is Islam, submission, which means following, obeying him. Religion meaning you're yielding to and submitting to him. That which comes from God is the dispensation to which you submit yourself, which is religion, the Holy Writ being the dispensation God has established. He who is marked by his submission to what God has laid down is the one who practices the religion and maintains its practice, who establishes its practice as he keeps up the canonical prayer. It is the servant who establishes the practice of the religion, and God who determines its nature. For your submission is your action, and the religion is from your act, since your being blessed may be only through that which derives from yourself. Thus, just as your act establishes your blessedness, so also his acts establish the divine names, which acts are you, being originated relative, so that only in relation to his effects is he called a divinity, and only in relation to your effects are you called blessed. Thus does God equate your position in this respect with his, when you maintain the practice of religion and submit to what he has established. If God wills, we will elaborate on this point after we have explained religion as it is with creation, of which God takes due account. All religion is for God, from you, not him, except as being your origin. He Most High says monasticism, Rahmaniya, was introduced by them for the first time, which incorporates the revelations of wisdom that were not brought by the apostle, as is generally known in bringing the message to the people from God in the customary fashion. Since the wisdom and good apparent in it are in harmony with the divine determination respecting the purpose of revealed scripture, it is in God's sight at which he laid down in his dispensation, although he did not prescribe it for them. Thus, since God has, unknown to them, opened the door of his providence and mercy to their hearts, he causes them to extol what they have established apart from the more familiar way brought by the prophet and recognized by divine revelation, seeking by it the pleasure of God. He says, they do not observe it, that is, those who established it and for whom it was established, as it should be observed, except to seek God's pleasure. Thus they believe. We brought those who believed in it their reward, but many of them, that is, those among whom this way is practiced, are astray. That is, they have departed from submission to it and its proper practice. As for those who have departed in this way, God will not be well disposed towards them. However, a divine command requires obedience. The one commanded either obeys willingly or opposes the command. As for the former, no more need to be said. As for the latter, the opposition by which he is governed demands of God one of two courses, either indulgence and forgiveness or censure. One of them must take place according as he requires it or deserves it in himself, for the reality always acts in accordance with the servant and regards his acts and state. Thus, it is the essential state that affects the decision. In this way, religion may be regarded as a matter of requital and recompense for what pleases and what does not please. Concerning recompense for the former, he says, God is pleased with them and they with him. And concerning recompense for the latter, whosoever of you oppresses, we will cause him to experience a severe punishment. His saying, we overlook their evil deeds, is also a recompense, a jaza. Thus, religion is a form of recompense. For the religion is Islam, which means submission, so that one submits to what pleases and to what does not please, which involves recompense. This, then, is the outer aspect of the subject. As for its inner and secret aspect, it is a divine self-revelation in the mirror of the existence of the reality. For the contingent beings receive from the reality only as they themselves in their essential states dictate. They have a form for every state, the forms varying according to the variation of their states, as the self-revelation of the reality differs according to the state. Thus, the servant is affected in accordance with what he is in himself. Thus also, only he bestows good on himself and only he evil, being his own benefactor and chastiser. Therefore, let him not blame any but himself, nor praise any but himself. God's is the conclusive argument. Lillahi hujjatul balagha. Through his knowledge of them, since knowledge is dependent on that which is known. A deeper truth in this matter is that the contingent beings are, in the final analysis, non-existent, since the only true existence is the existence of the reality in the forms of the states in which the contingent beings are in themselves and in their eternal latent essences. Just let this individual in. So you should know that it is none other than the reality who undergoes pleasure and pain, and that it is the divine self-revelation that is the result of every state, which is called consequence and penalty. The same applies to good and punishment in the case of evil. In this sense, the religion must be called or interpreted as a custom, ada, since there befalls the servant only that which is known his own state demands and necessitates. The poet says, as was your custom, Dinika, with Huwairith before her. Now, here's another point I completely disagree with Ibn Arabi about, because as proven by Arab lexicographers themselves, the etymology of the word deen actually is not a Semitic word at all. In fact, it entered Hebrew initially from Avestan, from ancient Persian, right? And the word Diana in Avestan is actually the name of each individual's holy guardian angel, the pre-eternal form of themselves that comes and is born with them into the world, and then which the individual in the Avestan or the Mazdian religion of Zoroastrianism is responsible for cultivating during their lifetime, at which point, at the point of the exodus from the material life, they are met by their Dhyana at the Sinvat bridge, the razor-sharp bridge between the isthmus between the world of the living and the world of the dead. And they either cross that bridge with the aid of their Dhyana, or they fall off from that bridge by the aid of their Dhyana. But nevertheless, this is wrong here, because the etymology, and this was known at the time of Ibn Arabi, that the etymology of the word enters the Semitic languages through ancient Persian. So this is actually incorrect, what Ibn Arabi is saying here. So the meaning of custom, he says, is that something should revert to its original state, although custom in the sense of repetition is not appropriate to what we are concerned with. However, custom is an intelligible reality, and a certain resemblance exists between the forms. For example, we know that Zayd is the same as Amr in respect to their humanity, although in their instance, humanity does not occur twice. For if so, it would be a multiple thing, and it is a single reality, not a multiplicity. We also know that Zayd is not the same as Amr in respect to their individuality. Thus, Zayd as Zayd is not Amr as Amr because of their individual identities. On the surface, Zayd would appear to be a replica of Amr, but a true assessment shows that this is not true. There being from one standpoint no repetition, while from another there is a certain repetition. In the same way, we may speak of recompense, jaza, in one sense and deny it in another, since recompense is itself one of the states of contingent being. This is a question kept unexplained by those who know it as is proper, not because they are ignorant of it, but because it is an aspect of the mystery of pre-measurement or qadar, determination, which governs created beings. Know that just as it may be said that the doctor is the servant of nature, so might it also be said that the apostles and heirs are the servants of the divine command in general, and at the same time serving the states of contingent beings. Their service is one of their own states that they are in their eternal essences. Consider what a wonderful thing this is. It must be understood, however, that the servant in this case limits his service to that which accords with the rules governing of what he serves with respect to state or speech. The doctor may be called a servant of nature only if he works in cooperation with her. Nature has established in the body of the patient a particular complex of conditions by which he is called sick. Were the doctor to assist her in that particular manifestation, he would serve only to increase the sickness. Thus, he restrains her only in order to restore health to his patient. However, health is also from nature, which condition may be had by the setting up of another complex of conditions opposed to the existing one. Thus, the doctor is not fully the servant of nature, being her servant only in the sense that he would be quite unable to cure the sick man and change his condition except by means of nature. He serves her in a particular way, but not in a general way, which does not apply in this kind of question. In this way, the apostles and heirs are like the doctor who is at once both the servant and not the servant of nature, as regards their serving the reality. The reality manifests two aspects in determining the states of those who receive the divine command, the amr. The effect of the command on the servant is as the volition, not will, as everybody's translated, is as the volition of the reality determines, which is itself determined by its knowledge, the divine knowledge, which is determined in turn by that which is the object of his knowledge bestows of itself, which is not manifest except in its image form. This is a point that Sheikh Ahmed Ahsai has a real problem with in his Sharh al-Ziyarah. There's one particular section where he directly addresses this point. There's a very interesting way he addresses it. Thus, the apostle and the heir are servants of the divine command through the volition, but are not servants of the volition, opposing it, the volition, with it, the command, al-amr, which is the will, in reality, Mashiach, in order to secure the blessedness of the one charged to obey it. Were he the servant of the volition, he would not seek to advise, or would advise only in accordance with it. The apostle, as also the heir, is a doctor of souls completely obedient to the command of God, Amrullah. Considering both the command of God and his volition, it may be seen that what is commanded may be contrary to his volition, since only what he volits takes place, which is the reason for the command. Actually, backwards. This is backwards, completely backwards, per the Imami cosmology of this. If he volits what he commands, it takes place. And if he does not volit what he commands, it does not. This is called ordinarily opposition and disobedience, or sin. The apostle is merely the transmitter of the command, which is the will, the Mashiach. That is the command. The Amr is the Mashiach. For this reason, he, the prophet, said in the chapter of Hud, that its kind, or the volition, the irada, has caused me great anxiety because of their oft-repeated saying, "Be upright as you have been commanded." This caused him anxiety, namely the words "as you have been commanded," for he did not know whether the command was in accord with the volition and thus to be, or whether it conflicted with the will or the volition and thus could not be. None knows what the volition wills until what it has willed takes place, or what it has volited takes place. Because what is willed, it comes from the Amr in our cosmology. Except one receive a spiritual intuition from God, enabling one to perceive the essences of contingent beings in their eternal latency, in which case he may act in accordance with what he sees. This may happen to a very few men in times of isolation from others. He says, "I know not what he wills to do with me or you," thus speaking only of the veil between God and us. This is intended to convey that the prophet has unseen knowledge of certain things. That was the chapter of Jacob. So these are my metaphysical beefs with Ibn Arabi on the question of what comes first, and the translators, like I said, are not precisely translating these terminology, and this has also caused a lot of confusion in readers. It did for me until finally, I was versatile in Arabic. This is going back about 28, 29 years ago, that I could go to the Imami text and especially the Hadith collection and look at what the Imams had said about the divine action and the trajectory of its unfoldment to then try to make sense of this. And you can't make sense of the way that Ibn Arabi is putting it because there's an actual contradiction here. If the Amr is the divine Mashiach, which is the first thing that is created in Ilo Tempore, then the irada, the volition, is what follows the will. So the Amr as the Mashiach is the universal unfoldment of all possibility. And the irada is the is the actualization or the circumspection of each of these eternal possibility into individuated things. And Ibn Arabi seems to be confused. He's putting one cart before the horse. So it isn't the case that that there's a conflict between the Amr and the irada. The issue is that they're functioning on a different plane. The Amr as the Mashiach is the phase al-Aqdas, it's the most holy effusion, and the irada is part of it is the unfoldment of the phase al-Muqaddas, the holy emanation or effusion. And yes, there can be a phenomenal conflict between the Mashiach and the irada only in terms of the following, because the Mashiach as the universal unfoldment of all things, right, holds within itself contraries. And what the irada as the volition does is circumscribe these. So all the oppositional relations that we find throughout the universe are as a consequence of the irada rather than the Mashiach, right? So in essence, to put it in some kind of terms to be understood, the universal will is the non-dual element of God's unfoldment. It is the kuntu kenzan makhfiyan, I was the hidden treasure. So that is the level of the non-dualism. And so the next term, fa'ahbatu, and I love to be known, right? This is the level at which the irada or the divine volition comes into play. So it is the level of the holy emanation rather than the most holy emanation, right? And I don't understand why Ibn Arabi is at such pains to try to explain the situation, because had he had access to Imami Hadith, which I'm sure he did, this situation would have been a lot more, he could have articulated in a lot more straightforward manner. He could have also used the same examples and even better ones from either the Quran or Hadith. Then on the question of the definition of the word deen, is kind of struggling, I find, and you kind of sense that in the Arabic, to derive this meaning. He gets one sense of ad-din correct, but then in the examples he gives as he unpacks it, he doesn't, especially since we know, and as was known at his own time, that the word deen does have an etymology outside of the Semitic languages, and that it enters Arabic probably first through the Hebrew that it had borrowed from the ancient Avestan language of the Persians and the Zoroastrians. So these are the issues that I have wrestled with over this chapter with Ibn Arabi, and none of the commentators, to my satisfaction, responded and resolved some of these conundrums. So I'll hand it over to you guys now. If you have any questions, queries, insights, go for it. Anybody? Zan.
Can you put one more time in simple terms what is meant by these two words in the Quranic revelation? Din, the first word,
yeah,
and Islam, the second word.
Sure. Okay. Islam, right, from the root salama, right, it is in the grammatical case that we put it, Islam, from the root salama, to be at peace or to be at submission. In that particular form, it becomes an active verb. It cannot be a noun, right? These are the conventional rules of grammar. Even when we attach a definite article to Islam, right? It is still operating in the sense of a verb, although it acts within a given sentence as a noun. But nevertheless, the understanding is that it's still effectively a verb rather than a noun, although it's operating as a kind of a, as a ad hoc noun. Then that's the point, the ad hoc noun. So by Ibn Arabi insisting on the point that the definite article makes it a definite name, right? That it makes it an effective, he's making a very Zahiri argument rather than a Batini argument, which I find very strange on the part of Ibn Arabi. And I base this also on our own hadith, because we see when we look at the Imami hadith, the Imams themselves make a very, serious distinction between the Muslimun and the Mu'minun, right? In fact, from what the Imams say, that the Mu'minun are on a qualitatively higher level of understanding and or soteriological salvation than the Muslimun. The Muslimun are the Amma, they're the generality, those who have submitted. The submission is only the first stage of the realization of the revelation of the Tanzil. It is Iman in the sense that, the Imami Hadith corpus defines the word Iman and equates it with Ma'rifah and Taqwa. Taqwa, not so much in the sense of fear, but in the sense of God consciousness, right? Or reverence, spiritual reverence. So there is, at least in our Hadith collection, there is a dichotomy at work where one term of the dichotomy is pointing to something much higher than the way that Ibn Arabi is defining it. The way that Ibn Arabi is defining it, he is defining it by the example of what, at least in our methodology of hadith reading, is denoting a previous revelation, right? Which per the revelation of the Quran is mansukh. It's abrogated, right? So he's exempling Jake or Abraham and Jacob, right? And using that example from the Quran as the denotation of al-Islam in its verbal form, even though attached with a definite article as being the name of a definite thing. So that's the end of an argument. This is a very standard Sunni argument from a very Hanafi kind of point of view too, rather than even the kind of stuff that Ibn Arabi was used to in the Maghreb. So I find this very strange because he should know better than that. I mean, he was a maestro of the Arabic language and especially the grammar. I mean, some of the stuff that he does with the Arabic language is absolutely ingenious sometimes. But in this particular point, he's kind of stopping short of, really unpacking the meaning of this. So I found this a bit weird. And then deen itself has, in the Arabic immediately, the first sense comes from dayan, which means debt, right? So that even if we use it with the definite article alif lam as deen, it means the debt. So a lot of the way that a lot of the Imami commentators and exegetes have unpacked this, especially the more Gnostic and esoteric inclined among them. For example, in the Fatiha, when it says Malik Yawmiddin, the meaning of this, the owner or the king or sovereign or owner of the day of judgment that is usually translated into English, the meaning of deen here is not religion. The meaning of deen here is dain, so debt. So God is the owner of the debt. What does that mean? What is the debt that is being owned? The debt that is being owned is existence, your life, right? So Malik Yawmiddin in this kind of, or the master or the king or the possessor of the day of judgment, or the possessor is the possessor of the existential debt, which is you, your life, your very existence, right? And this then gleans the whole meaning of Mabda wal Ma'ad, the initiation and the return. So that God is the possessor and the owner of all of this. But Ibn Arabi does not glean that meaning from the word deen, which I find weird, because elsewhere, in several different parts of his Futuhat al-Makkiyah, he insinuates this very meaning himself very strongly without coming out and saying it. Then there is the issue that the word itself and its root is not a Semitic word originally. It is derived from ancient Persian that then, went into Hebrew and then obviously Aramaic, and then from Aramaic and Hebrew traveled into Arabic. and became deen, because we have no evidence. And there's been a lot of discussion about this in academic literature, about whether in the what remains of pre-Islamic literature, are there any definitions of the word deen that they have found in the poetry, especially, that has the same sense of meaning that you find in the Quran, and they haven't been able to come up with it. You can look it up in even, I think, in the Encyclopedia of the Quran that was put out about 20 years ago, that big 5-volume edition by Brill. There's some very interesting discussion, and I think the one person who wrote that entry kind of ends their piece with that kind of an aporia. So this is an enigmatic question, and these issues were known by Ibn Arabi's own contemporaries, at least in the Eastern Islamic world. But Ibn Arabi doesn't touch on that in this chapter of the Fusus al-Hikam. And I found this always very weird, strange, because following from the last chapter, if this particular meaning of Dain, as both Dain and also as its Avestan ancient Persian etymology was taken by Ibn Arabi, it flows perfectly with the last chapter where he was talking about the lord of each person, because the Diana in ancient Zoroastrian cosmology is precisely that very thing. It is that divine spark, that divine light, that divine imprint that every individual is born into. And so with the Zoroastrians, the whole meaning of religion, or deen, means to cultivate during your life with good thoughts, good action, good deeds, your holy guardian angel that you came into the world with, or your name and attribute, which is your Lord. That is the meaning of the word deen. And he had said this in the previous chapter, Ibn Arabi. That previous chapter that we covered last week was all about this very issue. So then once we move into the chapter of Jacob, he seems to forget all of this and move into a completely different discussion, which is quite weak, in my opinion, compared to what he had laid out in the previous chapter. Or maybe, I don't know, it's come to my attention many times that maybe he didn't want to push the argument too far, because if he came to this kind of an overtly hermetic definition of the word deen, people would really lose their their heads with them more than they already had. But these are the issues with those two words that he's, and this was known. It's not as if Ibn Arabi was, in his time they didn't know about this stuff.
Hello, does anybody else have something, or may I ask a question
Go
or
for it.
bring up something?
Go for it.
Okay, so I was reading the chapter on Set earlier today,
Good.
where Ibn Arabi spends a lot of time talking about individuals' Latin predisposition
Mhm.
and how that relates to what they are asking for,
Yes.
and also to knowing where they are.
Mhm.
But I don't know, I suppose the impression I've always had of the Deen is that it's more of a top-down sort of delivered sort of thing from God,
That's-
as opposed to being something that you discover through your, like, the way you'd understand your Latin predisposition is by introspecting. So I was wondering if there's a component to that here with this understanding of Deen that he offers, because there is in the understanding of Deen that you offer.
Probably. This last week there was a really neat lecture by a friend of mine at the Theosophical House here in Brisbane that I went to, where the lecture was about gnosis and initiation. I think they're going to put the talk online on their page. I'll link it to my Facebook, and put a link to it to the Telegram page. He, in the question and answer, he did a beautiful thing, because someone asked a very silly question and he answered them about the three models of that people look on God. Three concepts of God. Number one, is God the tyrant, the top down? There's God and the world, and there's a chasm in between the two, and God is a tyrant. The second one is the hippie Byron kind of concept of God being your bro, where you and God are equal, right? And the third is the concept of God as being the eternal hierarchy itself, the monad, right? Where everything is within God, and both everything is and isn't God, right? So the concept of God that is expounded in the chapter of Seth is the third one. But yet, when we come to the chapter of Jacob, yes, as you say, he seems to be expounding a concept of God in the first category, which is quite strange, considering that in the previous chapter that we covered last week, the chapter, what was it? The chapter of Ishmael, where he's discussing the Lord of each individual, right? This previous chapter would have segued very beautifully into the chapter of Jacob, where he's talking about literally the same thing. And especially given what Qaisari says, where he disputes whether, the attribute in question is supposed to be spirit, ruh, rather than roh, is, right? And if that is the case, then Ibn Arabi would have had a lot more powerful an argument. And so then the question of jaza, the recompense, the divine recompense, becomes a lot more profound and deeper per exactly the kind of unpacking that he's doing in that particular chapter. I don't know what to say to this, because the following chapters begin to, they once again start to expand the meanings of things and become quite profound. But in this particular chapter of Jacob, I don't find that at all. I find that Ibn Arabi's kind of shifted to that first model of God as the tyrant, who throws down the law and everybody must be afraid. And the word taqwa means fear. It doesn't mean reverence or God consciousness. Yeah, I think you're onto something. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And just remember, though, I mean, every Gnostic, and especially in any tradition, has states of expansion and contraction. So maybe Ibn Arabi, on the day he wrote this particular chapter, was in a state of contraction rather than expansion. It happens,
Could you please, can you hear me?
Yes.
Could you please speak about the word Mashiach, and the idea of the will, and just
Sure.
anything you can feel free to expand on?
The Mashiach is the universal will, and per the Imami Hadith, it is the first thing that God creates in pre-eternity. And this divine will then becomes the matrix in which everything else is generated throughout all being. And in the Shiite Imami scheme of things, what the divine will then generates is its own volition, which then creates its own determination, that then generates its own authorization, and then realization, and then the appointed time, and then finally the decree or book of things, or the universal book, the book of existence. This is the way that we have it written down in the Imami or the Shiite Hadith. So the will is a universal thing, which Ibn Arabi himself acknowledges right from the very beginning of the Fusus al-Hikam, that the divine will, the explosion of the divine will, once it decides to create creation, or per Ibn Arabi's model, when he generates the mirror of the cosmos, from that moment, that is the generation of all things out of the divine will. The origination of all things begins at that point, and that is the level of divine will. What then begins to actualize out of this eternal fiat is the divine volition, the irada, which Ibn Arabi talked about in this particular chapter. And this divine volition is then responsible for the actualization of each of the latent possibilities, or the infinite possibilities of all things, into actualization. One is a emanation that is what Ibn Arabi calls the most holy emanation, al-Faiz al-Aqdas, and the second, that the volition comes from the holy emanation. And it is at a lower level than the most holy emanation. So the verses in the Quran, for example, where we have, whensoever God says to anything, he says to it, be, and it is. This is the divine volition, and it's not the divine will. Right? Because God at that moment is instantiating a particular thing. Whereas the divine will, as the Mashiach, is instantiating the totality of things as an eternal fiat. And these totality of things have contraries, opposites, all of them. And it is generating them all as the same thing.
So the volition relates more to the creation,
The instantiation,
and the
yes.
will in terms of no, I can't articulate it. Yeah, but
The will is
can
the
you help me?
universal element. It is it just creates, outflows out of itself. All things generated come from the divine will, from the Mashiach. Everything.
Is it like whatever's in creation that keeps creating is like
the matrix of
an extension of that?
Creation itself comes from the divine will. Creation in itself. And this creation itself contains the totality of absolutely everything that is, was, and will be, right? Mm-hmm. But then this creation requires its own instantiations of things, particular creations. And so this is the divine volition at work.
Okay. And how is that relating to the concept of, is that related to the Messiah?
No. The word
or is that an entirely
those are different.
Well, okay, I'm a bit confused just because it sounds so much like the Hebrew. Yeah.
Al-Mashiach is a passive participle from the master of the word shay. So the word shay means thing, right? And when you, in Arabic, because of the rules of Arabic grammar, when you derive when you make a passive participle of a given verb, you can derive other meanings and other words from it and then make a noun out of it. So al-Mashiach derives from shay. So another way to translate Mashiach would be to say that which things. To call it Mashiach. That's why we call it the will.
That which things think?
Things.
Oh.
Shay itself means thing, right? So Mashiach or al-Mashiach with definite article, if you were to literally translate it, would mean that which things, right? Which in other words means the will. So this is why we call it the will, but irada is something else. And it's interesting because the word irada is also related through its root to the word for desire. One of the words for desire. So man arada akada wa hakada. Someone desired such and such, right? Or thus and thus. Right? That's a desire. But a Mashiach is on a much more subtle, more deeper plane of things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so in our hadith collection, al-Mashiach wal al-Amr, the will and the command are synonymous things. The Amr, the command, is what existentiates. It what brings existence as becomes existence. Right? Whereas the irada is then the desire or the will small case to then bring particular things within this existentiation of universal existence into being.
Do you think that latter one is the one, is that something that humans have any participation in or not?
This is the discussion that Ibn Arabi is having in this particular chapter in the latter half. And to me, he seems to be a little bit unclear about this point, which I find very strange. Because on the one hand, like for example, here he says it, the apostle is merely the transmitter of the command, al-Amr, which we said is the Mashiach, right? For this reason, he, the prophet, said the chapter Hud, etc. This caused him anxiety, for he did not know whether the command was in accord with the will and thus to be, or the volition and thus to be. But this doesn't make any sense because the Amr precedes the irada. So if the Amr has willed, or if the command has already willed something, right, then its coming into being is a completely different thing, even though it may there may arise a series of issues that may look either contradictory or oppositional in time, right? By virtue of a divine determination. But yet, from the perspective of the command, which is the universal will, if something has already been willed, then it has already been, even in potentia, it has been existentiated. Even Arabi doesn't seem to be very clear about this in this particular chapter, very unsurprising, very surprisingly, why that is the case. And his commentators don't resolve this ambiguity. Whereas if, with the Shiite literature of the Imami Hadith, this issue is beautifully resolved. What comes before one? The way that the Imams break it down is as follows. There are two co-eternal attributes with divine essence. One is God's knowledge, ilm, and the other one is God's power, qudra, right? Out of this, and these are taken to be, one. So, if we're talking about God's knowledge and God's power, this is just a placeholder. But then out of God's knowledge and God's power emerges the will, the volition, the determination, the authorization, realization, point of time, and then the decree or the book. It's perfect instantiation in the world. What's saying, Jaffer? You had a question.
Oh, I had another part to my question, but is it all right if I
Can you come
ask
back
it
to
or
it?
later?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What's saying?
Yeah, this is related to what we're talking about. When I was reading this part, I kept the way that I was understanding command was like, because the chapter says so much about Islam and Sharia. I was thinking of it in just very Zahiri terms, as like just the kind of command to pray and fast and that kind of thing. And I was thinking back to I don't know if the distinction's made here, but there's a distinction that he makes at some place between two kinds of amr. One is I think it's amr takwini and then amr taklifi. And I was reading this chapter as talking about the latter half of it as talking about amr taklifi.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that would make it make more sense.
That makes sense. There's only one problem with that, is that why then in the previous chapter we had the discussion that we did where he was delineating the Lord, right, of each person being different from the Lord of somebody else. So if we had that discussion in the previous chapter, and these chapters are supposed to build on each other, then he doesn't need to bring the Amr Taklifi into a discussion of the Roh or Ruh, depending on which you take, until much later on, the Amr Taklifi, because each of these chapters, besides the prophets that they instantiate, are also supposed to lay the foundation for the procession of things metaphysically into the world. That's the whole purpose of the Fusus. So why, especially since this precedes then the chapter on the Nur, which is Joseph, why is the taklif being established now when it is not even an issue of discussion in the next chapter that we're going to cover? This is my only question about this. I've thought about this many years. I actually, for a long time, I was actually where the position that you've taken now was my own position. That this is what he's doing. So let's just take it like that. He's making a Zahiri argument. But first of all, the point of the Fusus al-Hikam is to dismantle the Zahiri arguments. Number one. Number two, if there's supposed to be some kind of a semi-logical procession in these chapters to the various cosmological processes that are unfolding, with each prophet instantiating one of these, unfoldings, then why bring taklif into the discussion of Amr? He still needs to discuss what the nature of the Amr is in his takwini form, doesn't he? Especially since we've been progressively moving from the very transcendent elements of the Godhead, especially in the 3 chapters after Adam, Seth, then Noah, then the chapter after that, which dealt with Subuhiyah, glorification, which is a Tanzihi attribute, and then Qudus, which is also a Tanzihi attribute. So if we're moving down, progressively through this cosmological process, he still needs to delineate the various strata of the takween and how it's working, rather than jump into the taklif. You would think that the taklif would be one of the final outcomes of all this, rather than just jump in and throw the taklif in the middle of a chapter about ruh or ruh, depending on how you read it. I don't know. I mean, this has been one of the conundrums I have had with this particular chapter of the Fusus for a long time. And so one of the reasons I went to the commentaries was precisely because of this, to see how they resolve the question. And to my satisfaction, none of them have, at least not the first couple of generations. No one really addresses this, and it's there. And from the greater Shia perspective, whether we're talking from the Imami perspective or even the Ismaili one that Ibn Arabi would have been more familiar with, the Amr is something that is still at a cosmological level of generation and origination of things. The Taklif is just a derivative of it. You know, it's just like the final outcome at the very bottom end of its process. So we're still dealing with Takwin and Takawun, the generation of things, the existentiation of things. That's been my question over this. Anyone else? I mean, I went through the Futuhat, trying to get Ibn Arabi to pin something down on this particular question, and to some degree he does, because he spends a lot of pages, making a distinction between taklif and takwin and all that sort of stuff. And he does, in some places of the Futuhat, he does a beautiful job. But on this particular point, in this particular chapter of the Fusus al-Hikam, to me, it sounds like it's a contradiction. And especially when he's bringing the question of irada, even if you put the irada, the volition, and juxtapose it with, the issues that he's unpacking in this particular chapter, there's something he's not saying that he could have said, I think. Vanessa, go ahead.
When you were talking about like the Byron Bay bros who have that idea of God, where it's like their God, and it sort of puts like the locus of control into themselves solely, and
Yes.
excludes the submission part where you ain't shit sort of thing.
Yeah.
Even though you are. Do you feel that like the bit that could maybe remedy that is the concept of the transmission, that what you're doing, what you're enacting is transmission from the volition of God?
You sure? I mean,
yeah,
of course. I mean, most of these folks are not real initiates. And arguably there aren't real initiations in that community, at least as far as I remember when I used to hang out with those folks.
And there's a lot of hostility towards any Abrahamic.
And there's
anything.
overt hostility to the Abrahamic belief, but by the same token, if they took this stuff to India within that original setting, they would be just as much miffed, because like in any given traditional ashram in India, there's a lot of rules, and especially if there are there are very hardcore monastic rules in place. And this is also the case with a lot of the Agoris, the left-hand path. It's not just anything goes. There are community rules in place. And these community rules in place also have an initiatic dimension. And unless you accede to these community rules on that initiatic level, they won't even let you in to their circle. So what these folks are railing against is just, in my opinion, a very juvenile kind of, revolt against the parent figure, which is fine on one level, but the point of that kind of rebellion is to move and mature and move into the next stages of understanding the nature of the reality, which they're not. They're just stuck.
Sure.
So even Arabi and myself would not have a problem with someone who goes through life, basically looking at God as the tyrant, and then moving to the concept of God as the bro. And then finally that being unpacked where, God becomes the monad, and the whole full spectrum of things, the hierarchy of being, the chain of being, etc. There's no problem with that, because a lot of us, I've gone through these three stages myself, but the issue is if you get stuck in one or the other. If you get either stuck in one or number two, then you're in trouble.
So is that what you meant? Sorry. Yes. So is that what you meant when you said, when we were talking about the apostles and the transmission?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Hassan?
I just want to continue what Hussein has said, because it will make good sense if we guess or suppose that here Sheikh Muhyiddin is building on Ash'ari basis.
Yes, yes.
Because here Amr will means just what is the command of God revealed in the law, the Sharia.
That's right. Yeah.
And the irada is what God actually desires. And
Yeah.
here the famous argument is that God may command you to be a good person, for example,
Yeah.
but what actually God desires for you is to be awful individual.
Yes.
And that will happen in reality.
Yeah.
Is what God desires, irade, and it doesn't, and it will
God
not
desires
happen.
you
What
for,
is
yeah, exactly. God can desire you to be an awful person, but will you to be a good person?
Yes, exactly. And that is why Ash'aris are severely criticized by all of other Mu'tazili, Shi'is, and so on.
But we
Because
know
here,
we have this a version of this in Western philosophy itself. Arthur Schopenhauer, in his the world as will and representation, poses this very problem, the problem of the wills. It's one of the big elements of this particular book of his, the problem of the wills. I've had a problem with that whole perspective, and also with Ibn Arabi when he gets that way, for a simple reason, because previously Ibn Arabi has delineated what these are. One is the universal element, the universal container, and then the next one is the instantiations that occur within that container. So there's no opposition here. The universal will looks upon it. Remember what he said earlier, that from the perspective of the essence, everything is equal, right? It is only at the level that we, when we start moving down the levels of being, where these, these gradations and differences, etc., start to occur. So there is no conflict of the wills. There may be a conflict between the will and volition on an observable level, although that is even arguably not really a conflict. It's just what it is. But here, this is my complaint with Ibn Arabi, is that Ibn Arabi sounds like Schopenhauer in this particular chapter, whereas he sounds like himself in all the subsequent ones and the previous ones.
Because what continues a little later, what is the problem of the prophet? What made his hair to become white? Is فاستقم كما أمرت, that be on the right path, the manner you were commanded. So that the let's say here the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't know what the command means. Should he follow the Shari'i command? That is the let's say the letter of the law, the revealed law.
Yeah.
Or should he follow, or should he obey the irade, which is the desire of God? Let's say the universal desire, which will happen tekwini actually.
Okay, good point. Let's go back to the discussion, the debate we had last week, right? I talked about, that one of the questions I have is about why the Prophet did not order the complete ostracism of these Bani Umayyad when they took Mecca, right? So, from the point of view of the universal will, the conquest of Mecca was already a done deal. It was just a matter of just, going through the motions of the dramaturgy on earth to get from A to Z. So then what prevented the Prophet from effecting a complete ostracism of this family who were already established criminal? Was it the irada, or was it the Mashiach? I cannot believe that it was the Mashiach, so it must have been the irada, where the Prophet vacillated in between, telling, do away with these people or give them amnesty, which is what he did. But then by giving that amnesty to these people, a whole causality of problems then arose for the Ummah from that point forward. So that again kind of segues into that question we had last week.
Yes, I agree with it. Okay, Sidi, if you allow me just one
Sure,
last question.
Go for it.
Here in the beginning of the chapter, when it is the Shaykh is commenting the ayah about the monastery of the Christians, Rahbaniya, and he is saying, let's say, take the little bit more superficial definition of din. That is the way you are repaying the debt you have to God, repaying the existential debt. And he's saying we can, let's say, make logical, to divide logically the din to two kinds. The din which is to God, the din عند Allah, and the din which is with the khalq, the created thing. And commenting the ayah, he is saying that the monastery is something which Christians, they created or fashioned, or even, it would be not very exact, were falsified, but just made up by themselves. It was not common to God.
This is another, he's saying this. He's absolutely saying this. So here's the problem, but then and he acknowledges this later on, the commentators outright say this, out overtly. So Din al-Khalq would also include tasawwuf itself in the context of Islam. Because
that is exactly my question.
Yeah.
That there are situations, even it is not the comment of God, but it is something creating by men, because of the sincerity and devotion you have to it, then God accepts it as if was directly from God. That is my question. I want to comment on it.
And he says, and he kind of very vaguely insinuates it wherever we have, for example, the verses that God creates the deen wal-hikmah, the religion and the wisdom. And Ibn Arabi wants to have his cake and eat it too here, where he then says that the deen is what I'm talking about in terms of the deen in the law, and the deen in the khalq is the hikmah, such that the religion of creation, the al-Rahmaniyah, the monastic forms of Christianity that emerge, then would represent the wisdom, the hikmah, that then God also accepts, even though God didn't necessarily was involved directly in its revelation through a prophet to tell them to do that. But this in itself is a very arguable thing, because even if we take the narrative of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, from the Quran, and the Hadith, then the life of Jesus and the Hawariyun, the apostles, is very similar to how it is described in the Gospels. They were spending an awful lot of time in the desert, wandering around, not eating very much, and being exposed to the elements, and etc., etc. So arguably, even per the Quran and the Hadith, you can say that the Din al-Isa in that form is a form of the Ruhbaniyah. Now, maybe they have, embellished it and with, ornate rules and that sort of thing, but the Sunnah of Jesus, the Sunnah of Isa alayhi salam, is already the kind of the matrix in which the Rahbaniyah is established in the first place. So this is where I get a little bit, well, Ibn Arabi didn't know his history all that well, or he doesn't want to get into that argument, or what's going on here. Because even per the Quran, we don't have Jesus pushing a Sharia in the sense that we find with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Quran. There is a Isawi Sharia in a sense, but in the text of the Quran and the Hadith, we don't really have much evidence of what exactly, according to early Islam, that may or may not have been. So based on that, we can say that from what we do know about the life of Jesus from the Quran and the Muslim Hadith, and that there is a resemblance in the way that the Gospels are explaining this lifestyle, then that is deen in the law. Fi tanzil al-Isa, in the revelation of Jesus. Right?
Yes, yes, I agree fully. I agree fully. But here, the thing which I get to the bottom was, let's say, if even if we say Islam, the very superficial interpretation, completely submitting to God, but in the Ismaili sense, that Islam, it is submission to the natural law,
Yes.
which governs all the universe.
Everything, yes. Yeah.
Now, here getting to the point. So, is submitting to these universal laws is.
Whoop. It froze. You froze. Your camera froze. Your voice and camera.
Okay, I'll repeat it. So, if we take that Islam with God, the religion with God is to submit the universal laws, getting here to the point, it may happen sometimes you didn't understood properly what is the natural law, and you fall in some type of misguidance. But because of the sincerity you had in following the wrong rule, which you have understood, because of this sincerity, God will repay you as it was a direct command from him. What would you say?
This is what he's saying in this chapter of Yaqub, of Yaqub. This is what he's saying. But then there's the additional issue. He's saying, well, even though God didn't reveal it, yet this is what the wisdom is, as the book says, the religion and the wisdom, which what he's trying to do implicitly is to kind of pit the exoteric against the esoteric, where the monastic life would represent the esoteric and the religion of the law would be the exoteric. And he's trying to define the exoteric by the word deen, and the hikmah with esotericism. This is where I disagree with him. And this is also contrary to his own methodology elsewhere, where where the exoteric and esoteric are simultaneously present rather than juxtaposed or in a kind of a polar relationship. So, and that's where, I have an issue with the way that he glosses on the word deen, precisely because of that reason.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
The word deen, does the word debt in English, is that a little bit limited? Like, is there room in the interpretation for more like an obligation?
Oh yeah,
because debt, debt is like, people can argue, well, I didn't ask to exist, sort of thing, so why am I indebted to something that created me? Whereas obligation or being tied to something it's more like a symbiosis.
Sure. That's all present. I mean, Dane, in one of its very basic meanings is the money that you pay, as a blood requital. For example, if you accidentally killed somebody's kid, in an Islamic Sharia court, they would rule that you have to put, you have to pay blood money, and that blood money that is paid is called the Dane. That could be in whatever it could be. You give your own child up to them because you were responsible for the involuntary death of their child, etc.
So it is quite, so it's more on that literal exoteric side of like, you need to do the right thing. Yeah,
sure. But in its more multifaceted meanings, especially if you go into the lexicographical dictionaries and then the ones that give you the full historical etymology of the word, then this becomes even more complex and complicated and very profound at the same time.
As in can you elaborate on that?
Well, because the word deen is not a Semitic word. Like I said, it enters into the Semitic languages from the Persian and Avestan language specifically. And Deen in the Mazdian or Zoroastrian faith is the concept of the Diana. The Diana is your holy guardian angel. This is the Zoroastrians were responsible for basically the ancient Egyptians and the Zoroastrians were essentially responsible for birthing this concept to the world of someone having a holy guardian angel or a double, a perfect nature that is both them and not them simultaneously. With the Zoroastrians, you are born with your Diana into the world, and your whole purpose in life is to cultivate the righteousness in this world, which cultivates and feeds the Diana for your.
Do you think that's somewhat equivalent to like the New Age higher self concept, like the future most evolved self? Or
well, all of these concepts come from an ancient matrix, but yes. So yeah, so the higher self, which is your true self, is your responsibility. It takes care of you, and you take care of it. It takes care of you by metaphysically protecting you in the world. You take care of it by living the righteous life, doing the right things, or basically performing what the Zoroastrian the three things that the Zoroastrian scriptures say: Pendaranik, good thoughts; Guftaranik, good words; Kerdaranik, good actions.
So I would understand that as like the sort of the little intuitive voice that tries to guide you on the right path and keep you from danger.
Would be the voice of your conscience, would obviously be the voice of your Diana, yeah. And however the way the Diana is cultivated at the point of your death, the Zoroastrians say you will either meet a beautiful maiden at the entry point to the Chinvat Bridge, or you will encounter a very ugly demon.
Yeah, the condition of the soul sort of thing, or the consciousness by the time you die.
Exactly. Yeah. And then one either guides you across the very fine bridge from the Barzakh or the Isthmus into the afterlife, the hall of Ahura Mazda, or the other one will just basically throw you off the bridge into hell.
It's a bit like the weighing of the soul.
Yeah.
The Egyptian. Yeah.
So even a lot of Western scholars, when the whole branch of Quranic scholarship first got off the ground, were even saying that right from the Fatiha itself, Maliki Yawmiddin, and then Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, guide us in the straight path. The very concept of the Sirat al-Mustaqim very, very explicitly evokes Zoroastrian tropes and imagery. These are very Zoroastrian.
Do you feel that Islam is safe to say that it's kind of a merger of Zoroastrianism and Judaism, or am I missing something else?
No, it is. I've always looked at Islam as a kind of Abrahamicized Zoroastrianism. There is so much of the Avesta echoing through the pages of the Quran. It's just we are articulating. I don't find it surprising at all that one of the very most prominent early Muslims was none other than Salman Farsi, whom the Prophet, peace be upon him, made an honorary member of his own family. And Salman was a Zoroastrian, who had escaped and found his way with the Muslims and was taken in by them. And he was also the man responsible for the final victory of the Muslims against the Meccans and the pagans. His military strategy, because he had been a military person himself, his military strategizing was responsible for the victory of the Muslims. And in some Ismaili schools, the concept of Salsal, which is one of the rivers of paradise, is equated with Salman the Persian directly.
Wow.
And
they prayed 5 times a day, right?
Some of them do, not all of them do. No, because the 5 times is not actually mentioned in the Quran. It's only 3 times it's mentioned in the Quran. The 5 times actually comes from.
I feel better about that.
Yeah, 5 times.
I don't want to get up at dawn.
Hadith. It doesn't come from the Quran. The Quran only mentioned 3 times So, the taklif, the obligation is usually for 17 rakat, and even that is questionable in certain schools of fiqh, whether that is the totality of what is owed. All you are required to do is to pray 3 times a day, with or without maybe 17 rakat in total, or the cycles of standing, kneeling, and prostrating.
Because I read that the Zoroastrians prayed 5 times a day.
Yeah.
Did they?
Yeah.
Do you know?
Because each of these prayers in Zoroastrianism represent the 4 elements plus the quintessence. So that was the basis, the reason for the Zoroastrian 5, the number 5.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? We've gone over an hour. Okay, well then we'll call it quits for this week. This is the chapter start.
Can I?
Sure.
Can I just chime in? Sorry, I was still thinking about something Vanessa was saying. I don't know if, because I have the same question. I've heard this translation of Malik Yawmiddin as the master of the existential debt. But there is that sense of like, again, this kind of Jalali relationship maybe with the divine. And I don't know if I'm not satisfied with the discussion so far. Like I haven't heard how there might be a different way of understanding the concept of debt that maybe isn't as doesn't see God as so much
debt
demanding something.
I think the concept of debt that we have as humans has a negative connotations because nobody really wants to pay a debt back. You borrow money, whether from a bank or from a friend, and nobody ever really wants to pay it back. But if we look at the question from an existential point of view, then what comes to being and passes out of being is borrowed in its existence, which is a discussion that the Wujudi school always asks about the nature of existence and how that even what we predicate as wujud on a singular life itself is not an absolute category, because wujud in a mutlaqi or itlaqi absolute sense can only ever be applied to God and not any instantiation that comes into being and passes out of it. So when we say Malik Yawmiddin, if we take the deen as existential debt, then this starts to make sense. Because God is not only the owner of, God is not only the Malik or Malak of all things, the sovereign over all things, but it is the owner of that, of what comes into being and passes out of being. By virtue of what? By the existence that is itself, to which it imbues existence on these particulars, as it were. Alternative, even if you take it as Malik or Malik Yawmiddin, the deen, the religion, also belongs to God. So this is another point that in this chapter I've had a lot of problem with Ibn Arabi about, because if the Fatiha says whether you read it as Malik or Malik Yawmiddin, the religion itself belongs to God. So it isn't even you don't have to even translate it as the day of judgment, right? If you read it very literally, Malak or Malik Yawmiddin, then the day of the religion, Yawm being, what does the Quran says about what the definition of Yawm is? With a day is with God, it constitutes 50,000 years of your reckoning, right? So God is the owner of that 50,000 days, right? Or 50,000 years of the reckoning of human beings, which in botany literature constitutes a code, an epicycle, right? So God is even the owner of that. Malik Yawmiddin or Malak Yawmiddin. It's the owner of that massive epicycle of that it constitutes a religion, which itself is the existential debt that each particular created thing in existence is imbued with from the moment they come into existence, while they're in existence, or as they pass out of existence.
When people, if I may add, when I listen to a lot of interviews with near-death, experiences, people get the life review, at the where they look at their life and there's an evaluation, And they're often they're with like a presence that they might describe as God, or sometimes it's like a sort of a guardian angel kind of figure, and it's all happening telepathically. But so I kind of understand the day of judgment on different levels. Like there's the end of your life and what you did, like your deeds, and people in the life review in NDEs, they usually get sort of pointed out of like where you could have done better, or maybe they're made to feel other people's pain that they caused, or things that they were kind of almost like a bit of a mission that they were supposed to do and maybe didn't and got sent back. And so I feel like there's a debt there in terms of like no one really gets away with anything, you know, like there's a consequence.
Elsewhere, and even as we've kind of sort of covered in a kind of a cursory way already, and also subsequently as we'll cover more, there is a Yom Qiyamah, or is a Qiyamah or Yom Adin happening at every instant.
That's right, yeah.
Especially because we have a perpetual creation, tajdiq or tajaddud al-khalq. You know, the constant creation is constantly being recreated. So one of the ways that Ibn Arabi kind of phrases it in like a couple of his poems on the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, where with the Gnostic, every single moment and every change of emotional state constitutes a qiyamah, as it were, constitute a moment of a Yom Adin. So within a given day of the religion, you're experiencing multiple Yom Adins within yourself. And so this is the Gnostic approach, Jeff, which go ahead. Go ahead.
How do I put my hand down there? Oh, there we go. Yeah, I agree 100% with what you just said. And I just wanted to use like a practical example of what could be a debt or an obligation. Like you're hungry, your stomach's empty, you want to keep living. You need to take an action to keep living. That action is your obligation for your life. You have to eat food, you have to drink water, you get to keep living. So I just wanted to, I don't know if that's too simple.
But there's also, there's a lot more to that. Every individual existence life, whether on the physical plane or on the unseen plane, is already contributing to a network of universal flows. So for example, what you eat or what you buy or what you do or what you think is also, in a sense, germinating other things into existence. And, you know, with this kind of perspective, this esoteric perspective, it's not just, it's your thoughts. Your thoughts are even bearing things into existence. So in a sense, you're a conduit of this incessant flow, creation and recreation and destruction of the world at every moment.
Right. Yeah. Right. So there are levels of this obligation. I was just trying to use a really low, like in the realm of
ultimately, from the Gnostic point of view, all of this, that very existential reality that is you embodied, whether in your physical body or in your various astral and subtle bodies, all of this belongs to God.
Yes.
It is not yours. So this another way to look at it as Malik Yom, the owner of the existential debt, is sort of in a roundabout way pushing to understand that this concept of the ego, the einus, the anania, right, in a physical, circumscribed, you know, kind of way, where I am the possessor of my life. This is my identity, me. This is a delusion. Even that doesn't belong to you. You're very.
Is that why we say, like, you know, when someone dies, we say to God we belong and to God we return?
Yeah, inna lillahi wa inna alayhi raji'un. Yeah, that's one of the meanings of that. But also, so is that, you know, that verse of the Fatiha itself, Malik Yawmiddin, the owner of the day of the religion, or the owner of the day of the existential debt. And each day, as it says in the Surah Al-Rahman, kullu yawmin huwa fi shanin, every day it is upon some new task. So then the Yawm that the Al-Fatiha is referring to is all of those various days that is on some new task. So all of those various moments that you experience is a day in the sight of God. You know, so, and God in every single one of those instances and moments is the owner of it. It is the progenitor of it. It is the emanator of it.
Like
There is
when,
no you in
not
the
just when
equation
we
at all.
die, but when the earth, there'll be a collective judgment of the
Yeah,
earth someday,
the
and then
sure,
the
but this
different
judgment,
scales.
yeah, without kind of receding into the first model of things, that with there is a judgment happening at every moment. That earth, everything is being judged, right?
Is that when they talk about the recording? Like there's an angel recording, the angels who record in the book?
Yes, that's one
yeah.
way to look at it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, or the records, like some people call it the Akashic records, or
many terms for this. Many terms. Hassan, you had something to say.
Mine is off topic. So again, the title of the book. So if I understand, can we make the assumption that here Ruh, it is pointing to the Dhyana which you spoke about?
Ruh is the universal element. So Ruh is the intellect, per the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi, right? And this is what Bezeli puts his finger on, that he believes that it's Ruh. The intention of Ibn Arabi was initially Ruh rather than Ruh. Although all of the previous teachers before Bezeli himself, all beginning with Qunawi, all said it is Ruh. So this is the question. What are we dealing with? If it is Ruh, yes, then that is the Dhyana. That is the ease, because and especially given that the previous chapter that we covered, the issue of the individual lord of each thing was broached by Ibn Arabi.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Hossein, do you want to continue?
No, I think I need to think about it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank
Here's
you for
my
that.
recommendation. Why don't you just take that particular verse of the Fatiha itself and use it as your dhikr, Malak or Malik Yawmiddin. If you're versatile with the signs of the numbers and the letters, unpack it, meditate on it. Take each individual letter apart and look at them. Whatever comes to you in that kind of a exercise, take it, write it down, journal it, process it.
Okay, will do.
Vanessa.
Yes.
You wanted to say?
Oh no, I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right, folks. What are we at? 1 hour and 30 minutes. Okay, let's leave it here for next week. I was thinking we can do it as a single session. I will play it by ear. Let me think about this. We may do it as a single session, the Joseph, because the one after it, which is, I believe it's Shoaib, is a longer one, and that will definitely require 2 sessions. Yeah, where are we? Yeah, Joseph Hood. Hood is going to be a long chapter, sorry. And that will more than definitely require 2 sessions. So we can do Joseph as a single session, and then once we move into Hood, we'll break that up into 2 sessions in the weeks following after that. And this way we get through this stuff fast. I don't know about you guys, but I'm having a great time right now with this. Even though I've been reading this text for over 30 years, but it is really deepening this time around, doing it as a kind of a group exercise. Also, going with your feedback on this text, and then I'm going back to some of the commentators that I haven't looked at for a long time, and then rereading what they have to say, and then thinking about what they said, and then using the zikr on top of it. This is really special, in the way that it's, the dynamic that it's produced. It's a lot of understanding that it's downloading, I think, on all of us. So that's all I want to say for the time being. Until next week, Ya Rohu.